First of all, I would like to learn a little bit about yourself, your story. How did you get started becoming a learning designer director at Kahoot? What makes you start this journey?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. So where I started the journey, I think was, I studied computer science in my undergrad, but I quickly knew I didn't really want to be a programmer. That wasn't really for me. I was more interested in how people use technology. Um, and then I did some teaching, and then I realized that I wanted to combine the two, technology and education. So I did my master's in education technology, and during that time and afterwards, I got really interested in games and play. And I had some amazing opportunities to be part of teams who were working on that. So I learned a lot from other game designers. So my background is really in learning games, simulations, playful learning, and game-based learning. Um, and what's really most important to me is pedagogy and what we know about good learning based on learning science. And so often what we know is good learning is not the practices that are actually happening in schools or in a lot of ed tech products. So what I always try to do in my work is, find ways to design that really embody what we know about good learning, things that are student-centered, creative, iterative, social, all these things that build future-ready skills, 21st century skills. So how to actually design technology interactions, whether it doesn't necessarily have to be high tech, it can be, pretty basic, but how to design technology experiences that push learning forward, that transform learning, and empower students and prepare them for the future. So after I did my master's, I worked at MIT for many years doing research where we designed and developed learning games and other creative, playful technologies, implement them in schools, work together closely with teachers, and do research on not just does it work, but in what ways does it work and for whom, and what conditions need to be there, and how to change a teacher's mindset to shift from that traditional kind of sage on the stage model to using technology to to let students take on more ownership. So researching, design principles for good learning with technology, as well as the implementation and the environment that needs to be there in any educational setting. So I worked at MIT doing that for many years, and I learned so much. And I learned a lot about play and games, but also about research and about the kind of the disconnects between good learning, what we know is good learning, and what's really happening in schools and why that's happening. And then a few years ago, I transitioned out of academia into industry. So I became the director of learning design at Kahoot. And I joined Kahoot, really excited to bring new ideas about play and learning, everything I just talked about, and really, find ways to take a well-loved product and very well-known product and push a little bit to open up more ways for more different kinds of learning and more different kinds of learners to build more future-ready skills, more holistic skills, in addition to content knowledge. So that's what I've been working on the past few years at Kahoot.
So amazing and a very inspiring journey and also career path. And from your sharing, I can see that you have the expertise both as a teacher in both technology and then hands-on in industry, which is a really rare combination, I would say. So in order to, when you move from academia to work in industry, what do you found as the most challenging thing that you need to overcome to bridge the gap between theories and industry? Because a lot
Yeah,
of
great
ethics,
question.
a lot of ethics in my region, especially in Asia, where parents and learners and the whole education system still are very knowledge focused and great heavy and focus on studying for competition or for grades.
Yeah. So I would say, here it's actually not that different. I think there is, in the school culture, there is a little bit more recognition that things like creativity, communication, collaboration, that these are important, but I don't think we see it that much in practice. We definitely see it in pockets. There are amazing teachers here and there, and there are innovative schools doing a lot of project-based learning, inquiry learning, things like that. But it's not really widespread. So still, what you're describing, I would say, is still the norm, like fairly traditional, teacher-centered, focused on content knowledge and standards. And that goes for curriculum and classroom instruction, and therefore EdTech often follows suit. And it's so systemic. I mean, it's nobody's fault, right? It's like, that's how schools work. It's very hard to change schools. So teachers have these responsibilities. They're beholden to the standards. So they have to do things that cover the standards. Then they don't have much time to explore and do more innovative things. So then what the schools are demanding in terms of EdTech products is more focused on content and standards. And it's just very hard to, change mindsets. But in terms of your question of, what is challenging from going from research to industry, I would definitely say it's two parts of this. One is getting people to care about good learning. What is good learning? And it's not just caring about it, it's understanding the difference, right? The difference between what is currently happening in schools and what it could be. So helping people understand that there is another way to learn, and that this is, we have an opportunity to support that and open all these new possibilities. And that is both, internal in a company, but also external, like convincing teachers and districts that it's important and that they should prioritize it. So that's one thing, kind of showing, here's where we are now, but here's where we could be, and here's how it would benefit students. And I think the other side of that coin is making it feasible in terms of a business, a business model and revenue, because certainly we know how to make EdTech that could be very innovative and student-centered and creative. But that won't always sell. And when you're in a company, you do have to sell, or you can't continue making good things. So I think helping people see why it matters, see and care about good learning, and then figuring out what is the right amount. What is, maybe we can't just immediately jump to all project-based learning, but maybe that's too big of a leap. But what is, an EdTech tool we can create that feels familiar enough, or it can fit in the current classroom, but also pushes practice a little bit in a way that that districts and schools and teachers will see the value and be willing to pay for it, and therefore we can continue making these kinds of experiences. So it's the challenges are really connected to so many parts of the EdTech ecosystem.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that it's very challenging. So that's why I think that it's very admirable that companies, EdTech company like Kahoot, really invest in evidence-based and research, and also applying research about learning sciences to the developing of products and new features. Can you share a little bit of how you observe that the background and the evidence-based approach in developing the EdTech product can benefit education technology companies and products?
Mm-hmm. So I can talk a little bit about kind of how we use learning science and evidence in the design and development process. And then I can talk a little bit about, after we have the product and we put it out in schools, gathering that kind of evidence of what is actually happening and how that's valuable too. And I won't, I'll try not to talk too in depth, but feel free to, ask more questions about any part of it. So when we're designing any EdTech product, we want it to be based on what we already know about good learning. There's so much research out there, like I said earlier, that's not really being applied in schools. So we want to take advantage of that. So a lot of so I'll mention, kind of the classic core Kahoot, like the main Kahoot product that everybody knows and loves. I would say one of the main pedagogical approaches that is based on is active learning. And active learning, if you've read about it, you may know there are different kinds of active learning. There are different sort of levels of active learning. So certainly it can be, discussed what kinds of activities on Kahoot fall into which levels of active learning. But I think everyone would agree that, when you add in a Kahoot to a college classroom lecture or even, at the end of as review or formative assessment at the end of a unit, it feels much more active and engaging than just the teacher talking at the students, or then the student just answering questions on their own quiz paper, because it's very social. So a lot of ideas from learning science about active learning and social learning really have been incorporated into Kahoot from the start, right? And I think the original concept of Kahoot, like one of the most kind of special, what's really in the special sauce, is that social experience. So people are, everyone answers on their own. So they have their own say, but they are part of this larger experience, right? And the excitement when the answer is revealed is a social thing. So there's lots of documented, research about the value of social learning too. And especially when teachers use it to kind of spark more discussion. So it's like you may ask a question, but then in between the quiz questions, they can get students really talking because they've noticed, oh, I didn't get it, or who all got that one right? Not very many of us. So then it can lead to more deeper discussion. So those are some great things about the kind of core Kahoot. And then I'll just mention a project that I've worked on at Kahoot was developing a new tool on the Kahoot platform called Kahoot Sparks. And this tool was actually developed with support from the Lego Foundation. And the goal of the project was to create an experience on Kahoot that would be more inclusive of neurodiverse classrooms and neurodivergent learners. And also to get at kind of more student-centered experience and more different kinds of skills, not only content. So with Kahoot Sparks, we really based it a lot on UDL, the Principles of Universal Design for Learning. And that is a framework about how to make experiences that are inclusive, that are customizable and flexible for all kinds of learners. Not, gearing it towards any one group, but really making it work for everybody. And a lot of times that means making it open enough that students can find their own way. So for example, in Kahoot Sparks, students respond to open-ended prompts. So there isn't one right answer, one way of thinking. It really recognizes all the different kinds of ideas that students may have. And it allows students to draw or type their responses, whatever they're comfortable with. So it gives them different ways to express themselves. So I can share more about Kahoot Sparks, or I can send some more information. But just to say that was very much based on UDL principles, and we worked very hard from the beginning to incorporate those principles into the design of the product. So that's kind of one realm of research-based design and using learning sciences in the design and development of a tool. And then once we have the tool, gathering evidence on outcomes and the student experience, like does it work is always the question. And that's a very complicated question. And we have to, we really have to look at it in a much more nuanced way than just does it work. It's not yes or no. But we are also fortunate at Kahoot that many studies have been done on Kahoot. mostly by, third-party researchers, people who just chose to study Kahoot with their classrooms or with other students. So there is a lot of evidence out there about Kahoot. And we recently worked with some research partners who did a meta-analysis of many of these studies to look across and see, what is the benefit of Kahoot. And those studies found that there is a benefit. There is a pretty good benefit for learning, which is wonderful. And why is this valuable to us to know? For a couple of reasons. So how do we use this evidence? One, of course, is to let everybody else know, right? In our marketing, in our outreach. Of course, districts want that confidence that, okay, there's some evidence that this is working, that it's helping students learn. So of course it's valuable to tell, our customers and partners that we see it's working. We don't just, it doesn't just look nice, it actually is effective. But it also can feed back into our own design and development processes, as well as like other offerings and materials that we create. So it's also good input for us. And one more note that I'll say about this kind of, efficacy studies and looking at the effectiveness of EdTech is that it's always important to really, like I mentioned, always important to look with kind of a nuanced perspective. So yes, Kahoot has a good efficacy, and we can show that. But what does that mean? That if you have to look at the studies to see what were they actually doing, right? So they were probably, doing very content-focused Kahoot quizzes. And that's great. We love that. That's what Kahoot was, a lot of Kahoot is built for that. But there are also a lot of other ways to use Kahoot that, as I mentioned before, it can lead to more classroom discussions or more, student-centered learning. If you have students, for example, create their own Kahoots. So I want to emphasize both that looking at evidence of an EdTech tool is very important. And we should put a lot of stock in that, but we should also question and think, okay, so this is the evidence they've collected, but what other ways are there to use the tool? Or will this tool, can I use this tool? Can I implement in the same way in my setting, in my context? Or are there other things I may need to consider? So always thinking about, the different ways of implementing a tool, how you're using it and who's using it. And what does it mean to be effective in your own context? Like, what are you looking for? So both of these things I think are really important when we think about evidence.
Thank you so much, Louisa. One quick question, because for education technology companies, founders, a lot of them actually are not, may not be educators, but they started to see a problem in the education system and they try to fix it. But then it's also very costly to implement research or doing some like testing and then also fix the products. Do you have any lessons learned from the process of product development, for example, in Kahoot? So you can help education technology founders, for example, to save time and also to help the learning designers working for those smaller, newer education technology to really utilize the resources to still develop good quality education product.
Yeah, that's right. Not every company can, commission a research study or partner with a researcher or conduct a big RCT or anything. And that's totally fine. So one really important way to address this is what I talked about first, which is using existing research and evidence of what works in terms of good learning science, using that in the design process, right? So basing your designs on those approaches and being able to articulate, being able to show clearly what is the research, the approach that works, and how does that show up in the product? So embedding it in that way, it's kind of, evidence by design. Like we believe this will be effective because it's based on a proven method. And then, of course, even before you are able to conduct larger studies on outcomes, there are lots of ways to do smaller, little r research. Some of that is play testing, user research, things like that. When you play test, even with a small group, you may not have, a big enough N to make claims about like the outcomes, but still you can start collecting evidence about what you're seeing, what students are getting out of it, what teachers are saying, what they're noticing, all of that those kinds of observations, even a small implementation is useful and valuable. And I know, many folks from Wicked also often talk about the EdTech evidence portfolio, right? It's not just one thing. It's not one big study that proves that it's effective. It's a whole collection of things that show evidence in different ways, in different contexts. So when you're a startup and you're starting out, start small. Also, your product is constantly changing. So even if you could do a bigger study, it wouldn't be that helpful, because in 6 months or a year, your product is going to be very different. And then would that study even feel relevant? Would it even help districts evaluate? Maybe not, if it's changed a lot. So stay agile, do, small play testing, even if a lot of it is kind of observations or small groups of users, but do it, I would say, frequently, and find ways to document and track those observations and that data, because if you build it up, it becomes more robust the more you keep adding to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that the last question will be related to the implementation of gamification or game-based learning in EdTech product. I think that's a trend, but also one of the most misused theory in EdTech products. A lot of the products claim that they apply gamification and game-based learning, but really, does it help learning, or it becomes a distraction? And I think also the same approach will be seen with new technology, for example, AI. And I would love to hear your comments on that, and from your experience, how EdTech products can use the learning sciences and also practices, also building the process to really to implement and apply new technology in a maybe conscious and mindful way.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm thinking where to start with this. Yeah, so I think I would start by, the distinction, because not everybody is clear on the distinction between game-based learning and gamification. So, just real quick, gamification is often things like points and badges. It's a gamey layer that is kind of added on to usually an existing learning experience. So typically gamification doesn't change the learning experience. It just adds what usually ends up being extrinsic motivation. And I don't want to say that gamification is all bad or nobody should do it, because certainly it has its place and it can be fun. But it shouldn't be the only thing that someone claims is improving the learning in their product, right? Game-based learning is where the game mechanics are more deeply embedded into the learning experience. So you're doing actions in the game that feel like you're solving problems or part of the challenge of the game, and that is actually where the learning is happening. So it's not like you do some math problems and then you play a game, It's more like you're really exploring a world, or you're solving puzzles that use the math practices or science skills that you actually need to learn. So that's good game-based learning. And so I think that's an important distinction when we think about evidence too, because what kind of evidence would you expect, right? If it's a game where you answer some quiz questions and you play some of a game, yes, that might be more motivating for some students for some amount of time. And so maybe you would find some gains there, but would it sustain their interest, their motivation over time? And would it help them go deeper into conceptual learning, deeper understanding, more 21st century skills? So we have to question that. With game-based learning, there's, I would say there's more evidence that it may help with those things. And so if you're then studying, a deeper game-based experience, then you want to really be looking for those and showing that kind of connection. I think, to the part of your question about like cutting edge technologies, new technologies, what we often see, new technologies are developed and there's so much excitement about them in education, but many times they're then still used in traditional ways, right? Basically, any new technology is not on its own going to transform learning, because very often you can still use it in a teacher-centered way. So with any technology, it's partly about the tool, what it can do, but it's equally as important about the implementation. What is the teacher doing with it? And I think one good example of this is Scratch. Everybody's probably familiar with the Scratch platform. Really awesome EdTech tool. It's one of my favorite examples because it's really clear how it's creative and social and based on constructionist pedagogy. But it still can be used in traditional ways, and sometimes it is. There are a lot of teachers out there who don't have such a student-centered mindset yet, and they end up, going through an activity where they tell students, okay, add this block, now add this block, now type this, and then we all end up with a working project, but it's the same project, and the students didn't really have ownership or bring themselves to it, So that's a very cool, amazing technology, but used in a traditional way. And at the same time, you can use traditional technologies sometimes in more student-centered ways. Regular old Google Docs and Wikipedia, if you're using those not just to absorb information, but to do a project in your community, that's very student-centered. So with any cutting edge technology, and this is absolutely true for AI, it can be used in traditional ways to kind of replicate conventional learning, or it can be used to leverage more creative, playful kinds of learning. So I think what I always the message I always try to get across to my students and whoever I'm working with is, we really have to look at not only the technology, but how it's being used, and support teachers to understand the difference, and how we think it should be used, and what good learning then looks like for their students.
So amazing. Thank you so much. And I really love how you use the example of the same tools, but different approach and different mindset from the user may end up really differently. So how do you think that that new education technology products or EdTechs and learning designer, when using AI tools right now for learning, but right now really lacking the, you mentioned that we can use already established research about technology to save time and resource to start a product. But for new technology like AI, there's not enough evidence about how it supports learning yet. Do you have any suggestion how we can actually build the products using AI to support learning in this?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same method of using, research on good learning that we already know that isn't being used enough. So, a lot of AI tools out there are helping students get to the right answer. It's a tutor, it's a grader. And again, those have their place, right? Those can be useful. If they save teachers time, if they help students do what they need to do, then that is definitely useful. I would not take that away. But I also want us as a field to be pushing the boundaries and thinking, okay, what are some good pedagogies that we really know can transform learning? Let's say, project-based learning. So then how can AI support that kind of learning? If one problem with project-based learning is that teachers feel like they don't have all the knowledge they need to support students, a different project for each student, great, AI can probably help with that. So it's seeing the connection there and then, taking the risk and trying it out and helping support teachers figure out how to kind of let go and use it in different ways. Because the mindset of what we want learning to be is always more important than the technology tool.
Thank you so much for a great sharing and all of great experiences and advices. Would you like to also have any final suggestion or final notes for people who are aspiring to become learning designer in the field, how and companies who want to really develop products, effective EdTech products?
So I think I have mentioned this, but I think I would say my one big message I always want people to remember is to play test early and often. So, there's no way as a designer, no matter how much research you've read, no matter how much you've designed before, there's no way that as an adult learning designer that you will always get it right when you design something for kids or for any audience, really. So, just remember that being a learning designer, it's not about knowing what's best. It's about starting with something, identifying a good idea, and then iterating to make it great. And such an important part of that is putting the idea in front of kids or students or teachers, whoever your users are, as regularly as you can, and just be open to their feedback and really work together with them to understand their experience, to combine, what's appealing and engaging to them and what's motivating together with what we know about good learning.
Thank you so much. I think that I would like to steal your time for the final question because your final points is so great. I would also like to ask you, do you have any advice for any EdTech founders or people who making the business decision about if they are worried that focusing and building evidence-based product, like doing testing regularly and early, may take so much time and resources, and how they can balance that with the business and performances selling part.
It feels like it takes extra time in the beginning, and you're always tempted to skip it. But I can tell you it's going to save you time in the end, because if you develop a whole product and then you play test it and then you realize, oh, students aren't into this, or wow, it's not really getting at what I said it was getting at, then you're going to have to go back and change so much. That's going to be time consuming. So it's better to get this feedback early and often, and be able to iterate very rapidly than to find out later, oh, wait a minute, this isn't really what districts want, or okay, students aren't loving this. So it is a balance between there can sometimes be tensions in what we want, what we know about good learning and how we want to transform education, versus what will sell and what the market is demanding right now. So that is always something to think about, how to push the boundaries and be innovative, but in a way that still can sell today. But again, play testing with students and doing market research and putting it out there and seeing what's the right level of innovation and comfort. There's really no other way besides getting feedback from users and customers.
Thank you again so much.